And now, using the similar argument, let's try to find out how much area is contained in between the interval between 2 standard deviations above up to 3 standard deviations above the mean. So that's the area that I'm shading right there. That's the interval I'm shading right there. And so now, once again, what I mean by similar argument is that now if you start at the center, which is the mean value, and go all the way up to 3 standard deviation above, that interval right here, according to the empirical rule, it's gonna be halfway of 99.7. So we're gonna have 99.7 divided by 2. So that is going to give me a total of 49.85%. So 49.85% is supposedly the total area that I cover all the way from the mean value up to that limited interval, up to that third line, vertical line right there. And now, we just discussed earlier that the interval from between the mean up to 2 standard deviation above the mean, that interval that I'm indicating right there is a 47.5%. Okay, so now the remaining shaded area, the remaining interval really contains a 49.85%, subtract 47.5%. Okay, and so that is going to give me a total of 2.35%, which goes right here in between this interval. So this interval here really contains 2.35% of data. And so once again, with some quick observation or making similar arguments, once again you can argue that the shaded area on this left hand side of the mean value on the figure is also going to contain 2.35% of data. Okay, so now putting all the little pieces together, that as we have learned, then here's our normal distribution curve. This small area here in between the mean value and the 1 standard deviation above the mean, here's my mean, 1 standard deviation above the mean, that little area is 34%, as we have learned. Okay, and likewise this little area that I'm shading to the left hand side. Okay, and here's a little that little area is also a 34%, and that is why the 2 equals area here added up to be a 68% once again. Okay, and then these 2 little areas that I'm now shading differently, these 2 little areas that I'm about to label now, these little area, they are 13.5% each. 13.5% each. Okay, and the last area, which is these tiny portions, right here, those are a 2.35% as we put the pieces together, and 2.35%. And so once again, if you think about adding all these little pieces together, it goes back to the empirical rule where we have strictly in between 1 standard deviation below the mean up to 1 standard deviation above the mean, we have just nicely a 68%. Okay, because it's from 1 standard deviation above up down to 1 standard deviation below the mean. And then in the longer interval, that center at the mean, this long interval, we're gonna have to add all that little numbers together, and that makes up a 95%. and the last interval once again it goes back to the empirical rule. It contains 99.7%, and this final diagram this final graph that I draw, this final drawing, this illustration that I draw right here is also available in your textbook, that in section 3.3, so that you can always reference back to it. Okay, so here's just simply a couple detail labels that I should have put in at the beginning. Alright,